So imagine you've just flown into Chicago for the very first time, like you have this incredibly important meeting to attend right in the heart of the city.
Okay, setting the scene. High stakes.
Exactly.
Right.
So you rent a car, you pull out a highly detailed, old-school physical street map, and you start driving.
Right.
You're meticulously following the lines, checking the street signs, making all the right turns. But almost immediately, nothing makes sense.
Wait, like the streets don't match up?
Yeah. The avenues aren't where they should be. The landmarks are just, well, they're completely missing. You're basically driving in circles.
Well, that sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. And then, as you pull over in frustration to examine the map more closely, you realize something horrifying. Due to this catastrophic printing error, the map in your hands, even though it says Chicago right across the top in big letters, is actually a detailed map of Detroit.
Oh, wow. Which puts you in a pretty desperate situation.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the fundamental reality of your environment is completely divorced from the tool you're using to navigate it.
No.
I mean, it genuinely doesn't matter how fast you drive, or how aerodynamic your rental car is, or how well you optimize your route.
And it certainly doesn't matter how positive your attitude is. Like you can sit in that driver's seat, grip the steering wheel, and just hype yourself up.
Yeah, repeating your daily affirmations.
Right, telling yourself, I am making great time, I am enjoying this beautiful drive, I am manifesting my destination. But you are still nowhere near where you actually want to be.
No, because the underlying issue has absolutely nothing to do with your behavior or your emotional state.
Right, the foundational problem is simply that you're holding the wrong map.
That is just, it's the ultimate metaphor for the human experience, isn't it? When we find ourselves feeling chronically stuck or unfulfilled, we spend so much energy trying to change our behavior or our attitude, and we completely ignore the fact that our underlying map of reality might be fundamentally flawed.
And that is exactly what we are going to unpack today. Welcome, everyone, to the Book Nook. This is our deep dive space dedicated to exploring the most impactful, transformative books in self-help, spirituality, psychology, and personal growth.
We are so incredibly glad you're sitting down with us today.
We really are. And our mission in this deep dive is to extract the absolute most vital, life-altering insights from a true landmark text. We're talking about The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey.
Such a classic.
It really is. We've gathered this massive stack of excerpts and notes directly from the source material, and our goal is to give you a comprehensive shortcut to being deeply well-informed. We want to guide you through these profound concepts without you feeling overwhelmed by the sheer massive scope of the book.
And honestly, we really cannot overstate that scope. When you look at the cultural footprint of this text, it's commanded monumental praise across virtually every sector.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you have directors of NASA utilizing these principles for space exploration. You have NFL Hall of Fame quarterbacks like Fran Tarkenton and Roger Staubach citing it as a definitive guide for leadership under pressure.
Right. CEOs, university presidents.
Yeah, global senators, they all point to this specific framework, not just as a business manual, but as a literal blueprint for navigating human existence.
But here's the real hook, The core premise that we are going to explore with you today is that true success, the kind of deeply rooted, enduring success that actually brings peace of mind, is never the result of a quick fix.
Definitely not.
It's not a personality trick you can memorize. It's not a communication hack you can just deploy in a boardroom. True effectiveness requires a fundamental, agonizing, and ultimately liberating shift in how we actually see the world.
It requires the humility to admit we're holding a map of Detroit.
Yes. And the courage to finally trade it in for a map of Chicago.
Which is so difficult.
Yeah.
And to understand why that's difficult, Covey takes us on this fascinating historical detour through the evolution of success literature in America.
I found this part so interesting.
Right. The sociological analysis is incredibly rich. He conducted this exhaustive study of success literature published in the U.S. spanning all the way back to 1776.
Wow, that's a lot of reading.
It is. And by analyzing hundreds of books and essays, he noticed this startling, almost tectonic shift in the cultural narrative. For the first 150 years, roughly, from the founding of the country up until World War I, almost all of the literature focused intensely on what he termed the character ethic.
I think we need to define that clearly for the listener, because the term character gets thrown around a lot today in very vague ways.
Yeah.
What exactly were those early writers referring to?
So when we talk about the character ethic, we're talking about the philosophical premise that true success rests entirely on immutable principles.
Okay, like what?
Things like profound integrity, depth humility, fidelity, temperance, courage, justice, patience, the golden rule.
Basically the heavy hitters of morality.
Exactly. If you want a perfect historical artifact of this, look at Benjamin Franklin's autobiography.
Oh, right, where he tracks his virtues.
Yeah. It's essentially the story of a man painstakingly trying to integrate these fundamental objective principles deep within his own subjective nature. The belief was that you only experience enduring success when you weave these basic principles into the actual fabric of your character.
It's an inside-out approach. You don't try to change the world until you've mastered yourself.
Exactly.
But according to the source material, a massive pivot happens right around the end of World War I. Like, the culture completely abandons that foundational approach.
It really does. And if you think about the historical context, the Industrial Revolution, mass media, the birth of the public relations industry, it makes sense. The cultural view of success shifted dramatically toward what Covey calls the personality ethic.
So it became less about who you are and more about how you look.
Precisely. Suddenly, success was a function of personality, of curating a public image, projecting the right attitudes. The focus shifted to the skills and techniques that lubricate human interaction.
And didn't this new personality ethic sort of fracture into two different paths?
It did. One path focused heavily on PR techniques, how to smile effectively, how to win friends, how to flatter people, and the other path focused on positive mental attitude, or PMA.
Now, to be fair, on the surface, some of that PMA stuff sounds relatively harmless, maybe even beneficial, right? We hear stuff like fake it till you make it all the time.
Oh, absolutely. There's an entire industry built on the idea that if you just project enough confidence, the universe will yield to you.
Yeah.
And the text is careful to acknowledge that some elements of the personality ethic are valid. Having a positive attitude is generally better than having a negative one.
Sure.
But the danger, as Covey points out, is that a vast majority of this modern literature became clearly inherently manipulative.
Like teaching people to fake interest in someone's hobbies just to extract what they want from them.
Exactly. Or teaching people how to adopt a power look to visually intimidate colleagues. It treated deep character as a mere footnote. Covey equates it to handing someone a social aspirin.
A social aspirin. I love that.
Right. It addresses the acute, immediate problem, like it might temporarily relieve the pain of an awkward interaction, but it leaves the underlying chronic disease of bad character completely untouched.
That analogy is brilliant because it really highlights our cultural obsession with symptom management. If we map this onto our modern digital landscape, the personality ethic is basically the psychological equivalent of applying a beautifully lit, highly edited social media filter over a photograph of a crumbling, condemned house.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right, you post it online, and it looks absolutely gorgeous for a split second on a glowing screen. You get the likes, you get the immediate validation.
But if you actually try to walk inside that house...
The floorboards are rotting out from under you, the plumbing is destroyed, the roof is caving in. You simply cannot live inside a filter.
You really can't.
But I have to ask, from a practical standpoint, does this mean that personality traits like having strong communication skills or possessing natural charisma are entirely useless? Should we just abandon trying to be articulate?
Not at all, and that is a crucial distinction. Personality traits and communication skills are highly beneficial. In an interdependent world, they're sometimes essential.
Okay, good to know.
However, Covey categorizes them strictly as secondary greatness. Primary greatness is fundamental character strength.
So character has to come first.
Always. Here is how it works. If you try to utilize sophisticated influence strategies to get people to trust you, but your actual character is fundamentally flawed, if your private life is marked by duplicity or selfishness, you just cannot sustain success in the long run.
Because eventually the cracks show.
Exactly. Your duplicity will inevitably breed a deep, unspoken distrust. Every single technique you use, no matter how smoothly you deliver it, will be perceived as manipulative.
Because human beings are incredibly intuitive creatures. We might not always have the vocabulary to explain why, but we can almost always feel when someone's internal motives do not align with their external behavior.
Right.
If there is no foundational trust, there's no relationship. Full stop.
Precisely. To focus entirely on techniques while ignoring character is fundamentally like trying to cram your way through an entire academic education.
Oh man, the cramming system. I know it well.
We all do. You ignore the coursework all semester, you stay up all night before the final drinking coffee, you memorize a few facts, and you might actually pass. You might even get an A.
But you don't actually know anything.
Exactly. You don't achieve true mastery of the subject. You just learned how to hack a temporary system.
I will readily admit I have lived that exact cramming lifestyle in my academic past. And you're entirely right. I remember absolutely nothing from those classes.
Most of us don't.
But the text makes an even deeper point by asking us to apply that exact same cramming mentality to a natural system. Have you ever stopped to consider how profoundly absurd it would be to try to cram on a farm?
It perfectly exposes the arrogance of the quick fix mentality. Imagine a farmer who decides to sleep in all spring, completely ignores planting the seeds, spends the entire summer socializing.
Living his best life.
Right. And then he wakes up in late autumn, puts in a few all-nighters of intense, frantic labor, and expects to magically bring in a bountiful harvest.
It's laughable. You can imagine the farmer out there with a flashlight at 2 a.m. in November, yelling at the dirt, "I am working really, really hard right now. I have a highly positive mental attitude about this wheat."
But it doesn't matter. The dirt doesn't care about your attitude.
The dirt does not care.
It doesn't care because the farm is a natural system governed by natural laws. You reap exactly what you sow. There is no biological shortcut.
Right.
And Covey's central thesis here is that human behavior, human trust, and human relationships are also natural systems. They are governed by this exact same unyielding law of the harvest.
So you can't cram a relationship.
No. Now, in a highly artificial, short-term social system like a brief job interview, you can absolutely lean on the personality ethic. You can charm someone, mirror their body language, and get by.
Serve for an hour.
But those secondary traits have no permanent worth in long-term relationships. The source material quotes Ralph Waldo Emerson to crystallize this. "What you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you say."
Wow. That is a profound psychological truth.
Yeah.
Our actions and our underlying character create a sonic boom that drowns out our carefully curated vocabulary.
Yes.
And the sources provide this deeply vulnerable story from Covey's own life that perfectly captures this struggle between the personality ethic and the character ethic. Let's delve into the story of his son playing baseball.
It is a masterclass in parental self-reflection. It requires a prominent expert in human relations to admit his own massive blind spots.
Which takes guts.
It does. So at the time, Covey and his wife, Sandra, had a son who was struggling profoundly across almost every metric of childhood development.
Academically, socially.
Yeah, he was failing tests, he was incredibly immature socially, and athletically, he was small and uncoordinated. The specific example is that when he played baseball, he would swing the bat in a panic almost before the pitcher had even released the ball. Oh, that poor kid.
And as children cruelly do, the other kids on the team would openly laugh at him.
Which is an absolute nightmare for any loving parent. I mean, the immediate visceral instinct when you see your child suffering social humiliation is to aggressively swoop in and fix the environment, right?
That was exactly their instinct.
Yeah.
They operated under the assumption that if being successful was important anywhere, it was supremely important in their role as parents. So they defaulted to the cultural norm,
Yeah.
the personality ethic.
They brought out the PMA.
They deployed every positive mental attitude technique they had. They would stand by the dugout and try to psych him up, shouting, "Come on, son, you can do it. Just keep your eye on the ball."
Trying to positively reinforce every tiny thing.
Yeah. And when the other kids laughed, Covey and his wife would actively intervene, telling the crowd to back off.
But the tragedy of the story is that despite all of their positive intentions, it completely backfired. The son didn't feel empowered at all.
No, he would just break down and cry, insisting he was no good and hated baseball. The verbal affirmations and the protection, none of it was penetrating the boy's despair.
And they weren't working because of a massive foundational flaw, the lens through which the parents were viewing the boy.
The map.
Exactly. At this time, Covey was researching the psychology of perception for executive training. He realized a terrifying truth. You have to examine the actual lens through which you see the world.
Because the lens shapes how you interpret the world.
Right. So Covey and Sandra took a painfully honest look at their own deepest feelings about their son. And they realized, to their horror, that their underlying perception, their internal paradigm, was that their son was fundamentally inadequate.
Oh, wow. They literally thought he was broken.
Deep down, they truly believe he was behind the normal curve and required constant saving.
Which explains everything. It reveals the terrifying power of that Emerson quote. It didn't matter what positive words they were shouting from the bleachers.
The son could feel their true perception.
Right, kids have that innate emotional radar. Their actions, their hovering, it was all communicating a devastating subliminal message. You are not capable, you are broken.
Precisely. Their true motives were shouting so loudly, the son literally couldn't hear their positive words. So Covey and his wife realized their own egos were heavily wrapped up in this. They wanted to be perceived as successful parents.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
It is. So they made a radical decision. They decided to completely stop trying to change him and instead went to rigorous work on changing themselves.
Changing their own paradigm.
Exactly. They actively chose to see him not as a broken project, but as a unique individual with complex potential that would unfold at his own pace.
And the behavioral shift that followed was profound. Once they changed how they saw him, they naturally changed how they treated him.
They stopped hovering.
They stopped the desperate cheerleading. They just let him face the natural consequences of his own life. The unspoken message shifted to, you are fundamentally okay, and we trust your capacity to navigate this.
And the result. The kid went through some withdrawal pains at first, which is natural, but then he began to blossom. Completely at his own pace, he became outstanding. Elected to student body leadership, all-state athlete, straight A's.
That is incredible.
But Covey makes a vital point. These external accomplishments were merely a serendipitous expression of the profound, secure feelings the boy finally had about himself.
They weren't a forced, anxious response to parental pressure.
Right. And that deeply personal experience led Covey to understand the concept of a paradigm. A paradigm is, quite simply, a mental map. It's the frame of reference through which we organize reality.
And the terrifying part is that we almost never question their accuracy. We just arrogantly assume that the way we see things is the objective truth.
Totally. To vividly prove how rigid these mental maps can be, the text references a famous optical illusion experiment from the Harvard Business School.
Oh, I want the listener to try and visualize this with us.
Go for it.
Okay, imagine you are sitting in a large university classroom. The instructor divides the room in half. To the left side of the room, he passes out a card featuring a specific line drawing of a young, lovely woman.
Right, highly fashionable, wearing a necklace.
Exactly. Petite nose, face turned slightly away. Now to the right side of the room, he passes out a completely different card featuring a drawing of an old woman. She looks maybe 70 or 80 years old, wearing a shawl with a very prominent, huge hook nose.
And the instructor gives the students a mere 10 seconds to stare at their respective cards.
10 seconds. Keep that duration in mind. It is an incredibly brief window. So after those 10 seconds, he collects the cards. Then he flashes a single composite image onto the main projector screen.
This composite image is a clever optical illusion that blends both drawings together.
Right, so the necklace of the young woman doubles as the mouth of the old woman. The chin of the young woman doubles as the nose of the old woman.
And then he asks the class to shout out what they see.
And the result is staggering. Almost every single student who spent 10 seconds looking at the young woman first confidently sees the young woman on the screen.
And the other half confidently sees the old woman.
Right. Then, to heighten the tension, the instructor asks a student from the left side and the student from the right side to debate each other.
And you can imagine the frustration. The student from the left is aggressively pointing, saying, "What do you mean, old lady? She's gorgeous. She's wearing a necklace."
And the other student's like, "Are you blind? She is an 80-year-old hag, and that is her mouth."
What's philosophically fascinating is that both students are looking at the exact same physical stimuli, the exact same black lines on the screen.
But they are interpreting those facts in diametrically opposed ways solely because of 10 seconds of prior visual conditioning.
Which forces us to ask a terrifying question about our own lives. If a mere 10 seconds of looking at a card can forcefully lock our brain into seeing reality in only one specific way.
What is the impact of the conditioning of an entire lifetime?
Exactly. Think about the family dynamics we grew up in, the schools we attended, the media we consume. They have all made a silent, massive impact on the shape of our internal paradigms.
Which naturally leads us to the most vital question of this deep dive. If our maps are drawn by our past conditioning, how do we actually change our maps? How do we experience a paradigm shift?
To illustrate that, the text shares another brilliant story. Covey was riding the subway in New York City on a peaceful Sunday morning.
Nice and quiet.
Very quiet. People are reading newspapers, resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, the subway doors open and a man and his young children enter the car. The dynamic shatters instantly.
Oh, no.
The children are completely, wildly out of control, yelling, throwing things, grabbing newspapers, total chaos. And the father just sits down next to Covey, closes his eyes, and does absolutely nothing.
If you have ever been on public transit, You can feel the physical irritation bubbling up in your chest just hearing that.
Oh, for sure.
The social contract of the quiet subway car has been violently broken. Finally, unable to take it anymore, Covey turns to the man. He tries to manage his temper and says, "Sir, your children are really disturbing people. Couldn't you control them a little more?"
Now, pay close attention to what happens next. The man slowly lifts his gaze as if he's coming out of a deep fog. He looks around, sees the chaos, and softly replies, "Oh, you're right. I guess I should do something about it. We just came from the hospital where their mother died about an hour ago. I don't know what to think, and I guess they don't know how to handle it either."
Wow. It takes your breath away. The emotional whiplash is staggering. Everything changes in a fraction of a second.
That precise moment is the definition of paradigm shift. Instantly, Covey's intense irritation vanished completely.
He didn't have to force himself to practice a positive mental attitude.
No, he didn't have to employ the personality ethic to fake a sympathetic face. His heart was genuinely, organically flooded with the man's profound pain.
His external behavior and internal emotion changed because his vision of the situation had been fundamentally altered. He saw the world differently, so he felt differently, and therefore he acted differently.
It proves that our emotions are downstream from our paradigms. If you want to change how you feel, you have to change how you see.
And there's one more incredible, almost cinematic example of a paradigm shift in the text involving a literal battleship.
Yes, the naval captain navigating a fleet through heavy fog. The ship's lookout spots a light in the distance on a collision course. The captain tells his signalman to flash a message, "Change course 20 degrees."
And the reply flashes back, "Advisable for you to change course 20 degrees.
And the captain, whose paradigm is built entirely on military hierarchy, is deeply offended. He signals back, "I am a captain, change course 20 degrees."
The reply comes back, "I am a seaman second class, you had better change course."
Now the captain is absolutely enraged. He orders the ultimate flex of power. He signals, "I am a battleship, change course 20 degrees."
And the flashing light comes back through the fog, "I am a lighthouse."
A phenomenal moment of forced humility. The captain changes his course immediately.
I bet he did.
If we connect this to the philosophical bedrock of Covey's work, the lighthouse represents unchangeable principles. Principles are natural laws. They cannot be broken.
As Cecil B. DeMille famously noted regarding the Ten Commandments, it is impossible for us to break the law. We can only break ourselves against the law.
Exactly. The objective reality of life is composed of these unmovable lighthouse principles. Our personal paradigms are merely our subjective attempts to describe that territory. The more our internal maps align with these external lighthouses, the more effective our lives will be.
Which naturally brings us to the next massive question. If we realize we must align our personal growth to these principles, how does that human growth actually occur?
The source material maps this out meticulously on the Maturity Continuum. It posits that human development naturally moves through 3 distinct stages: dependence, independence, and finally, interdependence.
Let's break down the psychology of these 3 stages.
The first stage, dependence, is the paradigm of you. It's the infant stage. You take care of me, you come through for me. And crucially, if things go wrong, I blame you.
We all start physically here as babies, but many people remain emotionally dependent well into adulthood, relying on spouses or bosses for their emotional well-being.
Right. The second stage, independence, is the paradigm of I. I can do it. I am self-reliant. I generate my own validation.
And then the highest stage, interdependence, is the paradigm of we.
Yeah.
We can cooperate. We can combine our talents to create something far greater than I could achieve alone. Now, here is where the text heavily challenges modern Western culture. A massive percentage of modern pop psychology puts independence on a pedestal as the absolute pinnacle of human achievement.
Oh, everywhere. Be a lone wolf. Don't need anyone.
Right. We fetishize independence.
It's not easy to see why. Compared to toxic dependence, independence looks like salvation. But Covey points out a fatal flaw. Independent thinking alone is completely ill-suited to an interdependent reality.
We live in a society where everything is deeply intertwined.
Exactly. Independent people who lack the maturity to act interdependently might be fantastic solo producers, but they will be terrible managers, disastrous leaders, and miserable spouses.
Because trying to achieve maximum effectiveness solely through rugged independence is, as the text beautifully puts it, like trying to play tennis with a golf club. The tool doesn't match the game.
That analogy clarifies so much. To be truly effective in a marriage or in scaling a company, you eventually have to choose to be interdependent. You have to willingly link your fate to others.
And this is the trap, you absolutely cannot skip the steps. You can't fake interdependence if you haven't yet achieved independence.
You really can't. Covey shares a hilarious but viscerally cringy personal story about his daughter's third birthday party that illustrates this perfectly.
The birthday party. Every parent can relate to this.
Covey came home from work to find his 3-year-old daughter positioned aggressively in the corner of the front room. She had gathered all her new birthday presents into a pile, fiercely guarding them, totally refusing to let any of the other children play with them.
And there were several other parents in the room, quietly observing this display of toddler selfishness.
Which is the worst part. Covey, who literally taught human relations for a living, felt an immediate crushing wave of embarrassment. He felt the social pressure to force his daughter to be a good sharing child.
So he systematically cycles through the entire modern parenting handbook. First, a polite request. Honey, would you please share your toys?
She says no.
Second, he tries adult logic. If you share now, they will share at their houses.
Louder, no.
Third, bribery. I'll give you a piece of gum.
I don't want gum.
Fourth, fear and threats.
Yeah.
Unless you share, you are in real trouble.
She cries out, they are my things.
Finally, out of sheer exasperation, feeling his ego bruised, he abandons all his training. He walks over, physically pries the toys out of his screaming daughter's hands, and distributes them to the other kids.
And what elevates this story is Covey's retrospective analysis. He admits he valued the subjective opinion of the other parents more than the natural internal growth of his child. He was demanding that a 3-year-old exhibit the highest level of interdependent maturity sharing when she hadn't even fully established her own independence yet.
Because he lacked patience in that moment, he borrowed strength from his physical size to force compliance.
Yes. Borrowing strength builds weakness.
That specific phrase is a complete showstopper. I think about how often bosses borrow strength from their job title to win an argument.
It's toxic because it builds weakness in everyone. It builds weakness in the borrower because you become addicted to external factors. It builds weakness in the person being forced because it stunts their internal discipline, and it ruins the relationship.
A child biologically needs to fully experience the security of possessing something before they can ever genuinely experience the generosity of sharing it. You cannot shortcut growth.
And this idea of not forcing short-term compliance ties perfectly into Covey's ultimate definition of effectiveness. He explains this using the PPC balance, anchored by the fable of the goose and the golden egg.
Right. A poor farmer discovers his pet goose lays a solid gold egg every single day. He becomes wealthy. But he gets impatient. He doesn't want to wait a whole day for one egg. He wants all the gold right now.
So he kills the goose and slices it open.
But there are no unlaid eggs inside. And worse, he has permanently destroyed the very asset that produced the wealth.
This simple fable contains the entire paradigm of effectiveness. Effectiveness is a delicate balance between production, the golden eggs, which is P, and production capability, the health of the goose, which is PC.
If you focus entirely on the eggs and neglect the goose, you destroy the asset.
Exactly. Look at a gas-powered lawnmower. If you run it constantly high production but never change the oil-maintaining PC, it's going to seize up and break down.
Or look at how this destroys organizations. The text mentions a restaurant famous for its clam chowder. A new owner takes over, wants higher profit margins immediately, so he secretly waters down the chowder.
Which works beautifully for a minute. His profits skyrocket, massive golden eggs. But slowly, the customers realize the quality is gone, trust is violated, the business dwindles to zero.
He slaughtered the goose of customer loyalty for a short-term profit boost. But I want to bring this into the home because the PPC balance is so critical in parenting.
Oh, definitely.
Say it's Saturday morning and you want your teenager's room clean. The clean room is the P, the golden egg.
Yeah.
The teenager in your relationship with them is the goose, the PC. If you just scream and threaten them, you might get a clean room by noon.
But you're destroying the psychological health of the goose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The PC approach involves investing in the relationship so they eventually clean the room out of personal pride.
Achieving that balance requires us to take total, unapologetic control of our own actions. We can't wait for outside forces to maintain our balance for us. Which transitions us to the private victory, starting with habit 1. Be proactive.
The bedrock of self-mastery. Being proactive isn't just taking initiative. The root of responsibility is responsibility. The actual ability to choose your response to any stimulus.
Human behavior is a product of conscious choice based on values, not conditions based on feelings. To illustrate the extreme limit of this, the text introduces the inspiring story of Dr. Viktor Frankl.
The Austrian psychiatrist.
Yes. Educated in Freudian determinism, which taught that your childhood shaped your character and you couldn't change it. But Frankl's theories were put to the test when he was imprisoned in the horrific Nazi death camps during the Holocaust.
He endured unspeakable torture. He lost his entire family. He was stripped of everything.
And yet, in the midst of literal hell on earth, he discovered what he termed the last of the human freedoms.
The one thing the guards couldn't take.
Exactly. They controlled his physical environment entirely. But Frankl realized that between the external stimulus of the torture and his internal response, there was a gap. And within that tiny, invisible gap lay his ultimate freedom to choose his response.
He used his imagination to visualize lecturing to his students after the war.
By exercising his self-awareness, imagination, and independent will, his internal freedom grew so vast that he ultimately became freer than his captors. They had physical liberty, but he had true psychological freedom.
I'm so glad we're exploring Frankl, but I have to push back a little bit here on behalf of our listeners.
Go ahead.
It's inspiring to hear about a giant like Viktor Frankl. But for the average person, it can feel dismissive to just tell them to choose their response. What about someone trapped in a genuinely toxic, abusive corporate environment where they have zero power? Does telling them to be proactive border on victim blaming?
That is the most common critique of Habit 1. And Covey addresses this directly through a story about a psychiatric nurse from Sacramento. During one of his seminars, she stood up, furious.
Why was she mad?
She was a dedicated nurse assigned to the most miserable, abusive patient imaginable. He constantly insulted her and made her shifts a nightmare. She admitted she was taking her frustration out on her own family at home. She was practically praying for this man to pass away just to be free of him.
And when Covey said, "No one can hurt you without your consent," she felt invalidated.
She thought Covey was detached from reality. She was saying, this man is making me miserable. But as she sat with the concept, she asked herself, do I actually have the power to choose my response to this verbal abuse?
And she realized she had been consenting to her misery.
Yes, she was letting a dying man dictate her emotional state. The realization that she could choose not to be miserable, to realize he could yell, but he couldn't force her to internalize it, completely transformed her. She said she felt like she'd been released from San Quentin prison.
Because it's not what happens to us that causes the deepest damage. It's our response to what happens to us.
Exactly. Covey notes that the absolute highest human value is attitudinal, how we respond to circumstances we objectively cannot change. Like his friend Carol, who is dying of cancer but chose to spend her final days dictating loving messages for her children's future. She exercised her freedom to choose profound love right up until the end.
To help us practically apply this, the text introduces the circle of concern versus the circle of influence. Imagine drawing a large circle. Inside, you write everything you worry about: health, kids, the economy, global warming. This is the circle of concern.
But inside that circle is a smaller one containing the things we can actually impact. This is our circle of influence.
Proactive people are laser-focused on their circle of influence. They work on themselves and their immediate relationships. And because they generate this positive energy, their circle of influence actually expands.
While reactive people focus almost entirely on the massive circle of concern, they obsess over the news, complain about their boss, they feel victimized. And because they neglect what they can control, their actual circle of influence rapidly shrinks.
You can diagnose whether someone is proactive or reactive just by listening to their language. Reactive language sounds like, there's nothing I can do, he makes me so mad, I have to do this. It absolves them of responsibility.
Proactive language assumes responsibility. I can choose a different approach. I will. I prefer.
There's a great example in the text. A university student comes to Covey and says, "Professor, will you excuse me from class today? I have to go on a tennis trip." And Covey asks, "You have to go or you choose to go?"
The student insists, I really have to. They'll kick me off the team.
Covey points out that staying on the team is a natural consequence the student desires, so he's actively choosing to go. Covey asks what the consequence of missing the lecture is.
The student realizes it's missing the learning. Covey says, make a conscious choice, but never tell yourself you have to do anything. The student finally admits, okay, I choose to go on the tennis trip.
That subtle shift completely alters the internal psychology from victimhood to agency. Once we fully accept that we are the active programmer of our lives. Habit 1, the next question is, what kind of program are we going to write?
Which brings us seamlessly to habit 2. Begin with the end in mind.
Habit 2 is built entirely on the principle of the first creation. Absolutely all things are created twice. There's a mental creation first and a physical creation second. Like building a house. You draw a blueprint first.
Covey frames this in the corporate world as the difference between leadership and management. Leadership is the visionary first creation determining what the right things are to do. Management is the mechanical second creation doing those things right.
I love the jungle analogy for this. Imagine a crew hacking their way through a dense jungle with machetes. They are the managers, hyper-focused on efficiency, writing manuals on machete-swinging techniques.
Making massive progress.
Right. But the leader is the person who climbs the absolute tallest tree, surveys the landscape, and shouts down, "Wrong jungle."
And how do the managers respond? They yell back, "Shut up! We're making great progress." They are so intensely focused on efficiency that they completely lose sight of direction. They didn't begin with the end in mind.
To figure out what that ultimate end should be, Covey introduces an intensely powerful visualization exercise. He asks the reader to vividly imagine attending a funeral 3 years from today. You walk into the chapel, look inside the casket, and you realize it's your own funeral.
It's a profound psychological exercise. He asks you to imagine 4 speakers: family, friend, colleague, and community member. And you have to ask yourself, what do you desperately want each of them to say about you?
What defining character traits do you want them to have seen?
The brilliance of this exercise is that it instantly cuts through all the daily noise and superficial metrics of success. You realize you don't want your eulogy to be about how many emails you answered on weekends.
It immediately connects you to your deepest values. It helps you identify your core center. The text breaks down various centers: spouse-centered, family-centered, money-centered, work-centered.
Let's analyze how these dictate behavior. Imagine it's 4 p.m. on a Friday. You have expensive tickets to a concert tonight with your spouse. Suddenly, your boss frantically asks you to stay late to prepare a presentation for tomorrow.
If you're a money-centered, you immediately calculate the overtime pay. You stay, assuming your wife will understand, because economic advancement is the priority.
If you're work-centered, you think about the career prestige. You might actually be perfectly happy to stay. Work is your identity.
But what if you are spouse-centered?
Your overriding concern is your wife's emotional reaction. You might refuse the boss just to avoid her displeasure. Or if you stay, you do it grudgingly and spend the whole evening being defensive and unproductive.
Contrast all of those erratic reactions with someone who is truly principle-centered. They aren't violently jerked around by the mood swings of their spouse or the panic of their boss. They have the emotional stability to step back, communicate honestly with both, and make a conscious, proactive decision based on their core values.
Exactly. And once we establish that core, we face the daily challenge of living it out. Which brings us to habit 3. Put first things first. This is about managing our time based on importance rather than urgency.
The famous time management matrix. 4 quadrants. Quadrant first is urgent and important crises, fires. Quadrant third is urgent but not important, endless interruptions. Quadrant fourth is not urgent and not important, mindless doom scrolling.
But the absolute key to true effectiveness is quadrant 2. Important but not urgent. Relationship building, long-term planning, exercising.
These things never demand your attention. The gym never calls to scream at you.
Right. So if we don't proactively schedule quadrant 2 activities, we will inevitably be consumed by the crises of quadrant 1.
Once we master this private victory independence, we are ready to step into the interdependent world. But we need a highly specific emotional currency.
The emotional bank account. This represents the amount and quality of trust in a relationship. You can make deposits to build a reserve and careless withdrawals that deplete it.
If the balance is high, communication is incredibly easy. You can stumble over your words, and the other person will still understand your intent. But if it's overdrawn, you're walking on verbal minefields.
So how do we make deposits? Covey outlines 6 ways. The first is understanding the individual. He shares a story of a father whose young son was obsessed with baseball. The father hated baseball, but took his son on a 6-week tour of major league stadiums.
Nye.
When asked if he liked baseball that much, the father replied, "No, but I like my son that much." He made what was important to his son as important to him as the son was to him.
There's another example of an academic father who valued higher education, but his teenage son wanted to be an auto mechanic. The father was constantly criticizing him. But when the father learned this principle, he shifted gears. He helped his son build a massive miniature wall of China out of bricks around their home.
They worked side by side for a year and a half. That massive deposit of understanding completely healed the relationship. And ironically, it led the son back to wanting to go to college because the rebellion was no longer necessary.
The second major deposit is attending to the little things. Covey tells a story of taking his two boys to a movie. His 4-year-old fell asleep in his seat. After the movie, Covey carried him to the car. Because it was freezing, Covey took off his own heavy coat and wrapped it securely around the sleeping boy.
And his older brother watched this entire interaction from the back seat. Later that night, the older boy was acting incredibly quiet. Covey asked what was wrong, and the boy, with tears in his eyes, asked, "Daddy, if I were cold, would you put your coat around me too?"
The story just hits you right in the chest, you know? The most important event wasn't the movie. It was that tiny act of kindness.
The other deposits include keeping commitments, clarifying expectations, showing personal integrity, and apologizing sincerely.
Let's talk about apologizing. Covey tells a story about trying to write in his home office while his boys are running around screaming. Suddenly, his son David starts frantically pounding on the bathroom door, yelling, "Let me in!"
Covey loses his temper, rushes out, aggressively yells at David, and sends him to his room.
But then he realizes he completely misread the situation. The boys were playing football, and one took a severe elbow to the mouth and was bleeding on the floor. David was pounding on the door to get a wet towel from his sister, who was in the shower. He was trying to help his bleeding brother.
Realizing his massive failure, Covey goes to David's room to apologize. Before he can speak, David says, "I won't forgive you." Covey asks why, and David says, "Because you did the same exact thing last week."
The harsh reality. Repeated apologies for the exact same impulsive mistakes are eventually interpreted as entirely insincere withdrawals.
A high emotional bank account is the absolute prerequisite for the habits of public victory. Habit 4, think win-win, and habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
To truly think win-win requires moving from a scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality.
Which is tough in the corporate world. Most people view life as a zero-sum game. If you get a big piece of the pie, there is less for me.
But the abundance mentality is the paradigm that there is plenty out there for absolutely everybody. Win-win requires high courage to advocate for your own needs, combined with high consideration for the other person's needs.
And to execute a win-win outcome, we use habit 5. Seek first to understand. Covey uses a fantastic metaphor here. Imagine going to an optometrist because your vision is blurry. The doctor listens for 2 seconds, takes off his own glasses, and hands them to you, saying, "These have worked for me for 10 years. Try them."
And predictably, your vision is vastly worse. You tell him you can't see, and he gets frustrated. "They work for me. Try harder."
You would never go back to that doctor. He prescribed a solution before diagnosing the problem.
Yet we do this constantly in communication. We listen autobiographically. We filter everything through our own paradigms. Covey breaks down 4 typical responses. We evaluate, we probe, we advise, and we interpret.
The text gives a great dialogue. A teenage son storms in and says, "Dad, I've had it. School's for the birds."
The father probes, "What's the matter?" The son says, "It's totally impractical." The father jumps to advising, "You can't see the long-term benefits. Hang in there." The son argues, "What good is algebra to an auto mechanic?"
The father evaluates. "An auto mechanic? You've got to be kidding me." The son defends his position. "Look at Joe. He quit school and makes lots of money." The father drops the hammer. "Joe will wish he stayed in school. You do not want to be a mechanic."
The father is well-intentioned, but he isn't listening to understand. He's listening to reply. He is elephant stomping on the boy's feelings with autobiographical advice. The son just shuts down.
The alternative is empathic listening, reflecting feeling and rephrasing content, giving the other person psychological air. Let's look at that same conversation with empathic listening. The son says, "School's for the birds."
The father reflects, "You're feeling really frustrated about school right now."
The son feels validated. He elaborates, "I sure am. Look at Joe. He dropped out and he's making money." The father reflects without judgment. "You feel that Joe really has the right idea?"
The father is creating psychological safety. The boy reasons through his thoughts and admits, "Well, Joe's giving up a lot later. You really do need an education." The father reflects, "Education is important to your future."
And because he feels safe, the boy drops his guard and says, "Dad, I took a reading test today. I'm reading on a 4th grade level. I'm going to flunk. I might as well quit now."
A total revelation. The issue had nothing to do with being a mechanic. The boy was terrified of public humiliation. If the father had kept arguing about college, they never would have uncovered the real problem.
That is the power of empathic listening. But people push back and say this takes way too much time in a fast-paced environment.
Who has the luxury to play amateur therapist during a Q4 sprint?
Covey answers this with a story of his papers blowing in a Hawaiian breeze. He was working in a room with a cross breeze. Suddenly the wind picked up, blowing his unnumbered manuscript pages everywhere. He panicked, frantically running around trying to catch them.
Managing the chaos.
Right. Finally, he realized it would be infinitely faster to just stop, take 10 seconds, and shut the window.
Empathic listening is shutting the window.
It might take more time initially, but it saves vast amounts of time downstream because you aren't prescribing the wrong solution based on a faulty diagnosis.
There is a stunning example of a salesman about to lose a massive 6-month deal. He panicked and started using aggressive sales techniques, but then he stopped. He sat down and said, "Let me see if I truly understand your deepest concerns. When you feel I completely understand them, we'll see if my proposal has relevance."
He spent an hour empathically summarizing the client's fears. When he finished, the client was so profoundly relieved to be understood that he stood up, called his wife, and told the salesman, "You've got the deal."
He didn't even make a counter-argument, which leads us perfectly to habit 6, synergize. When two independent people commit to win-win and empathic listening, differences become ingredients for something new. The third alternative.
Synergy relies entirely on valuing differences. Sameness is not oneness. Look at the vacation story. A husband wants to take his family fishing. The wife desperately wants to visit her ailing mother.
If they compromise, they split the week. The husband is resentful about less fishing. The wife is stressed, rushing the visit. Nobody wins.
But if they apply synergy, they pool their desires. They realize they are on the same side of the table. Through empathic communication, they unearth the core desires: family bonding in nature and supporting the mother.
So they find a camping resort located just a few miles from the mother's house. The husband gets his outdoor experience. The wife gets quality time with her mom. A solution objectively better than their original proposals.
There's also the story of the half-brained marriage. Covey was at lunch with a company president and his wife. The husband was intensely left-brained, highly logical, wanting concrete data. He's demanding his wife give him a bullet-point checklist of what he's doing wrong in the marriage.
But the wife is intensely right-brained. She communicates in emotional gestalts. She just says, "I have an overwhelming feeling that you don't value our marriage."
The husband rolls his eyes and starts cross-examining her. "Do you have the house you want?" "Yes." "Then what is the measurable problem?"
Covey finally asks as they have kids. They say yes, 2. Covey jokes, "In math, 1 plus 1 is 2. But you two made 1 plus 1 equal 4. You must have valued your differences at least once."
It highlights what they weren't doing verbally. The husband thought she was irrational. She thought he was a cold robot. Synergy occurs when they realize they need each other's vision to see the whole picture.
But living this intensely proactive, empathic life requires a staggering amount of energy, which is why Covey introduces habit 7, sharpen the saw, the habit of renewal.
You have to sharpen the saw because a dull saw makes every cut harder. It's the ultimate quadrant 2 activity. Covey breaks it into 4 dimensions: physical, spiritual, mental, and social-emotional.
Let's dive into the spiritual dimension. It means connecting with your core center. Covey shares a beautiful story by Arthur Gordon called The Turn of the Tide.
Graydon was a successful writer feeling totally burned out. His doctor told him to spend a day at the beach where he was happiest as a child and gave him 4 sealed slips of paper to open at specific times.
At 9 a.m., he opens the first. Listen carefully. He spends 3 hours listening to the sea. At noon, the second. Try reaching back. He remembers the innocent moments of his childhood.
At 3 p.m., the third. Examine your motives. He realizes his motives for writing had devolved into pure selfishness, chasing success. If you're only helping yourself, you do your job poorly.
And finally, at 6 p.m., write your worries on the sand. He writes out his anxieties and lets the powerful tide wash them out to sea. That is the epitome of spiritual renewal.
The mental dimension is just as critical. Covey warns against mental atrophy after formal education ends. We must read broadly and journal to examine our paradigms. As he observes, the person who chooses not to read is no better off than the person who cannot read.
That quote is a gut munch. And it brings us to the final summation, why this book matters. This framework isn't just for corporate executives. It's for absolutely anyone who feels stuck reacting to their environment, their boss, or their toxic family dynamics.
Covey and his wife realized during a sabbatical in Hawaii that they could use the gap between stimulus and response to become transition persons.
Explain that concept. It's so hopeful.
A transition person consciously stops the transmission of toxic generational scripts. Whether it's explosive anger or a scarcity mentality, they stand in the gap and say, "This poison stops with me." Instead of passing down generational trauma, they pass down wings and roots to the next generation.
They change the trajectory of their family tree. That is the ultimate goal. True peace of mind doesn't come from psyching yourself up. It comes from living from the inside out, in harmony with unmoving principles.
We've traced the path from the victimhood of dependence to the self-mastery of independence, and finally to the beautiful reality of interdependence.
I want to bring us back to our poor traveler stranded in Chicago holding the wrong map. You don't have to keep driving frantically around the city of your life. You have the freedom to choose. You can pull over, examine your paradigm, and begin drawing a new map anchored to lighthouse principles.
But I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought. Perhaps the hardest part of this entire journey is the grief of letting go of the old map.
Yeah.
Even if your old map was flawed, it was familiar. It allowed you to play the victim, which comes with its own perverse comfort. So the question is, what is the hidden comfort you are getting from holding on to your flawed map? And are you willing to surrender it for true effectiveness?
That is a phenomenal question. Surrendering the comfort of victimhood is terrifying, but it is the only path to freedom. To our incredible listeners, actively surrounding yourself with positive, principle-centered ideas is exactly the mission of our channel. We invite you to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss a deep dive into life-changing literature.
It is a profound privilege to explore these texts with you.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one.